I say something that doesn't work for you in the book, and then you throw the book away, and it becomes a coaster, and there's spaghetti sauce on it, and coffee rings, and it never comes back, right? And one of the things that I love about actually being able to be in conversation is that you get to actually unpack in real time the stuff that you're like, I don't know if I agree with that. No, I don't see how that works, Sonia. And we actually get to unpack it in real time. And so that is what I hope that we get to do in this conversation is that the organic, authentic, real questions that come up from you as we grapple with this concept of radical self-love, we get to talk through in real time. Does that seem reasonable?
Yes.
Fantastic. Awesome. So also before I do that, because this is socks. Come through, socks. I was like, okay, I'm taken aback by the fly socks to the left. I'm totally a magpie eyes. It's like shiny things. That's pretty. So not only did I write a book or whatever else, but I'm actually historically a performance poet. I've written and performed poetry and poetry slam for the last 13 years. That's actually been my job until I founded The Body Is Not An Apology. So I kind of consider it the way I say hello to people. So my plan today is to say hello to you all with a poem. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. However, I start every poetry event the same way that I've started it for 13 years, which is with a call and response. Are you all familiar with a call and response?
Yes.
Some of you. Somebody's been to a black church. Somebody has not. It's okay. All right. So the way it works is just your job is to repeat after me. I'm going to tell you what to say, and you're going to say it. Your job is also to be loud, louder than it already looks like you're going to be. So we'll see if you disappoint me. Don't disappoint me. All right. Let's try. When I say spoken, you say word spoken. Word. That was very collegiate of you. I was like, that feels very collegiate. All right, let's get uncollegiate. Your job is to be as loud as my dress is adorable. Very cute dress. I'm giving you cute dress and cute earrings today. Or your job is just to be so inappropriately loud that we break the roof off of this thing, and then all of a sudden this becomes like a whole different spot. Okay? We're no longer in the low ceiling office feeling. Okay? Are we good? Are we clearer?
Yes.
All right. Is that really? I mean, I have one more visualization if you don't have it. I'm going to give you the last one. Your job is to be as loud as my boobs are big. Are we clear? Is everybody on the same page now? That's okay. I just want to make sure we were there. When I say spoken, you say word spoken. To me, you say word to me. You say poet, you say tree. Poet. You say to me, you say free. To me. It's been 10 days, and not a single soul has smiled at me. I'm in Sweden, sit here by the gods of poetry to unpack my woman, my American, my black. Fashion it a map back to ourselves. This is what I like to think I do on the good days. On the good days, I'm supposedly a word hero. 10,000 tongues setting fire to the cauldron of possible until we boil up better than what we put in the pot. A hot flame of truth sent to singe someone awake. Are you awake?
Yes.
Good. On the good days. I'm not what I am on the bad days. On the bad days, I'm a lost love letter blown 10,000 miles away from the last hands that ever cared that I wrote it in the first place. On the bad days, I am the face of what is less than 0.8% of a population that finds me as curious as a three-toed frog. This loud American woman who walks up and pets the West Highland Terriers of terrified middle-aged Swedish women who back away slowly from me as if I might decide to eat them. And their little dogs, too. On my bad days. Maybe I'm just like you, a tourist in this strange province of skin, praying for a friend to rise out of the tide like Excalibur, sever lonely into a tiny slice of seam. See what I mean is, I'm in a dress shop in Uppsala, Sweden, and this particular body looking for an outfit the opposite of gaudy to wear to an award ceremony back in the States. Trying not to be hypely awake to the fact that everybody in here is staring at me like I just walked in here on stilts or nitrous oxide, I decide to ignore the stares and ask for what I need. Excuse me, sir. Can I see this dress in an extra large? The first thing you should know about Sweden is nothing is extra large, except for IKEA. The second thing you should know is that the customer service rep, in response to my request for a dress in an extra large, was a snicker, a sneer, and a guffaw. I have never had the opportunity to use the word guffaw as someone's response to an inquiry of mine, but this fella offered a guffaw as he brushed me off like yesterday's lynch, assuring me there was nothing in this establishment in my size. And this is not a poem about my hurried rush out of the door before the tears left kamikaze from my eyes. It's not even about my thighs and their inappropriate largeness in a store that obviously doesn't do big thighs. This is a poem to tell you it's been 10 days and no one has smiled at me. Not as I gathered my shards of self-esteem and shoved them on a train, headed back to a room no less sterile than a surgeon's knife. Not when I arrived, and a man held the doors open like an exceptional book. And it is not that people didn't look. It's that they didn't see. And I'm no less guilty of flying so fast in my good day cape that I missed the opportunity to save the life of the guy I flew by with the look in his eye, allowing the creases of my mouth to gather like a hammock offering a rest, because the truth is, my best gift, our best gift, is often stopping long enough to realize we're not doing this living thing alone. Every sidewalk is a front door. Every person is a home. We all just want to be invited in. And no, we cannot be everyone's friend, but we can be everyone's smile. Everyone's sit down a while. Everyone's, I am sorry that last guy was a jerk. Everyone's, I see you're hurt. I see you. I see you. I see you. And on this enormous planet, it is that eyelash of a moment that we so often miss. So forgive me if I walked into this space this morning and didn't offer you this. My only request when I'm gone, there's an entire planet that desperately needs it. Pass it on. Say word. I say all of that to say smile at someone. It really helps. It really does. There's feedback, so I'm trying to figure out where I am. Okay. All right. So I wrote a book. It's called The Body Is Not An Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love. I'm naked on the cover. And the best thing that I've ever received was I was at an event last week, and an older black woman said that she leaves the book out on her coffee top and it gets her laid. And I was like, score! My job is done here. If I'm getting older black women laid, I've done my job. What else is there? Jack and die happy. I'm really good about it. So I think we should start with what is radical self-love, because I feel like it's hard to have a conversation if we're not operating from the same framework, right? And so there's, in the book, I do kind of I describe what it is a little bit in the prologue very specifically, and then I describe what it ain't. So I'm actually going to start with the what it ain't part, because I think that it eliminates some of what you all might be coming into the conversation thinking when you think about the words radical self-love. So I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to open up the floor and ask you just sort of what are your thoughts. Here is the caveat. This conversation is as good as you choose to be brave. That's how this works, right? Like, either we have a rich, powerful, authentic, vulnerable conversation, because we could do this on the surface. Be clear, people do this on the surface all the time. It's often called body positivity. I just read somebody. I know I just read somebody's. And that's all right. I'll unpack why I'm reading somebody in a second. Or whoever it is I'm reading, the world. But there's a surface level of this, an easy apolitical version of this, right? And then there is what does actual transformative healing and justice look like in the world? And that's why I wrote the book. And we'll get to that, right? So I'm inviting you all to be in that transformative healing and justice conversation and not in that surface conversation. But that's going to require some bravery. Word? Okay. All right. I'm going to start off by telling you what it isn't. Chapter 1, Making Self-Love Radical. Radical self-love, what radical self-love is and what it ain't. Let me answer a couple of questions right away before you dig too deeply in this book and are left feeling bamboozled and hoodwinked. First, will this book fix my self-esteem, Sonia? Nope. Somebody was like, oh. Disappointed. Second, will this book teach me how to have self-confidence? No. Impromptu third question. Well, then why in Hades am I reading this book? You are reading this book because your heart is calling you towards something exponentially more magnanimous and more succulent than self-esteem or self-confidence. You are being called toward radical self-love. While not completely unrelated to self-esteem or self-confidence, radical self-love is its own entity, a lush and verdant island offering safe harbor for self-esteem and self-confidence. Unfortunately, those two ships often choose to wander aimlessly adrift at sea, relying on willpower or ego to drive them. And in the absence of those motors, are left hopelessly pursuing the fraught mirage of someday. As in, someday I'll feel good enough about myself to shout that screenplay I wrote. Or someday, when I have self confidence, I will get out of this raggedy ass relationship. Another read. Self esteem and self confidence are fleeting, and both can exist without radical self love, but it almost never bodes well for anyone involved when they do. Think of all the obnoxious people you know, oozing arrogance. Folks we can be certain think extremely highly of themselves. And although you may call them confident, at least that may be one of the things you call them, I bet the phrase radical self love doesn't quite fit. Pick your favorite totalitarian dictator, and you will likely find someone who has done just fine in the self-confidence category. After all, you would have to think through the bee's knees to entertain the idea of single-handedly dominating the entire planet. The 45th U.S. president strikes me as a man with epic self-confidence. The Donald is not struggling with his sense of self, even if the rest of the world is. Even if we were to surmise that Trump and others like him are acting from an exaggerated lack of self esteem or confidence, I think we can agree not much of their attitudes or actions feel like love. You may be asking, well, if this book won't help me with my self esteem or self confidence, will it at least teach me self acceptance? My short answer is if I do my job correctly, no. Not because self acceptance isn't useful, but because I believe there is a port far beyond the aisle of self acceptance, and I want us to go there. Think back to all the times you accepted something and found it completely uninspiring. When I was a kid, my mother would make my brother and me frozen pot pies for dinner. It was the meal for the days she did not feel like cooking. I enjoyed the flaky pastry crust. The chunks of mechanically pressed chicken and a band-aid colored beige gravy were tolerable. But there was nothing less appetizing than the aberrant vegetable medley of peas, green beans, and carrots, portioned throughout each bite like miserable stars in an endless galaxy. Yes, I ate those hateful mixed vegetables. Hunger will make you accept things. I accepted that my options were limited. Pick out a million tiny peas or get a job at the ripe age of 10 and figure out how to feed myself. Why am I talking about pot pies? Because self-acceptance is the mixed veggie pot pie of radical self-love. It'll keep you alive when the options are sparse. But what if there is a life beyond frozen pot pies? Too often, self-acceptance is used as a synonym for acquiescence. We accept the things we cannot change. We accept death because we have no say over its arbitrary and indifferent arrival at our door. We have personal histories and of bland acceptance. We've accepted lackluster jobs because we were broke. We've accepted lousy partners because their lousy presence was better than the hollow aloneness of their absence. We practice self-acceptance when we have grown tired of self-hatred but cannot conceive of anything beyond a paltry tolerance of ourselves. What a thin coat to wear on this weather-tossed road. Famed activist and professor Angela Davis said, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. We can change the circumstances that have had us settle for self-acceptance. I assure you there's a richer, thicker, cozier blanket to carry through the world. There's a realm infinitely more mind-blowing. It's called radical self-love. All right, so that's what it ain't. What comes up for you? What are the thoughts that come up for you? What is that? Yeah. What person even? This is gonna be the world's most boring event. What y'all gonna do? There's a hand. Awesome. Give it up for the first person because they're always the brave ones. Thank you. Hi.
So what you're saying is to love yourself, to radically love yourself is to accept yourself, but to accept yourself is not to radically love yourself.
Ooh, what a paradox. Yes, in some ways, that's exactly what I'm saying is that acceptance is a port, right? That's, like, I think in metaphors because I'm a poet, right? So the ship is journeying, and one of the stops, particularly in a world built on self-loathing and self-hatred, let's be clear, that's where the ship left from, right? It's not where the ship started. What I propose is that radical self-love is where the ship started. And the work to get back to radical self-love has some stops along the way. And one of those stops might be self-acceptance. Might be like, all right, I don't have to hate myself, right? That's a reasonable place to start. I don't have if where you are starting is I hate myself, I don't have to hate myself is revolutionary, right? But who wants to be in a relationship with anybody who's just like you, all right? Like, really, think about it. And I ask this, and some of you all might need to interrogate your real relationships, right? Because if your real relationships are with people who are like, you all right, I would invite you to level up. Right? I would invite you that there's no reason to be in different relationships with people who feel indifferently towards you, right? Like that's transactional. That's the world we already live in, and so why settle for that, right? And so yes, self acceptance is a place that we might go when we are starting so far away from what feels like love. But what I would offer is that love is how you got here, and the end is not that far away. It's not that far away. So the thing that I tell people all the time is we arrived on this planet as radical self-love. You came here in right relationship with your being and with the being of other people. You have never seen a self-loathing toddler. You've never seen a toddler who's like, I just hate my thighs. Never, not once, right? No, they're like, oh my gosh, look at my belly roll. I got feet. You got feet, right? They are enamored with who they are and with who we are as human beings. We all were babies. You were too. You were 3. You came here that way too. And so the question isn't how do I figure out how do I love myself? The question is what is in between me and who I've always been? That's the space we're traversing in the work of radical self-love, right? And what I offer in the book is that there's a whole lot of things that have been very intentionally placed in between us and who we've always been that are keeping us from being at radical self-love, being embodied in it, being able to live in it as a regular practice. Cool. Thank you. Thank you for that. What else comes up for folks? Yeah, right here. Hand over here.
Would you say that a significant part of radical self-love is not only loving one's body, but loving other bodies and accepting other bodies?
1,000,000,000%. 1,000,000,000. So part of the reason that I call it radical self-love is I pull it directly from the definition of radical, and I'll read that really quickly to y'all. I never turned pages as quickly as I just did now. So anyway, I'm not going to read all the other things around it. I'm just going to read the definition. Dictionary.com defines radical as number 1, of or going to the root or origin, fundamental, a radical difference. 2, thoroughgoing or extreme, as regards change from accepted or traditional forms, a radical change of policy of a company. 3, favoring drastic political, economic, and social reforms. 4, forming a basis or a foundation. 5, existing inherently in a thing or a person. So that's the reason why radical is in front of self-love for me. Because, and I'm just going to walk us through this one, going to the root or origin. I just told you we got here as love, right? We came here in right relationship with our own bodies and the bodies of others. We came here that way, right? Thoroughgoing or extreme. We live in a world that is already thoroughgoing and extreme in terms of profiting from and promoting self-hatred, right? We live in that world already. That is the world we exist. It is thoroughgoing and extreme to have a television show called The Biggest Loser, where we get fat people to come and engage in Coliseum-like abusive body modification, unhealthy, violent body modification for the purpose of our entertainment. That's extreme, right? It's extreme, and I'm going to connect it. And when I talk about the body, and I think this is really important for us to remember, and I talk about it in this book, right, is that I am talking about all the ways that our bodies exist. So I would offer that it is extreme that I have a panic attack when I see red and blue lights flashing behind me, and I'm afraid I'm going to be pulled over by the police. Because there is a certainly heightened experience of extrajudicial killing of black bodies in America. That's extreme, right? There are extreme circumstances under which our bodies live already. So I'm offering that we need an extreme kind of love, an extreme perspective of self-love to transform those already existing systems, right? 3, favoring drastic political, economic, and social reform. I'm not interested, and this is, I think, key to your question. One of the other reasons that radical self-love is not self-esteem or self-confidence is because I love y'all. I'm so glad to be here. It's beautiful. And I have very little interest in your individual self-esteem or self-confidence. I would not have gotten on a 19-hour plane to make sure your self-confidence was together. I dig you, but not that much, right? And I'm very clear for myself. Part of that is because I am not altruistic. This is not like, I just want everyone to feel good about themselves. No, it is the way that you live in your body directly impacts me. Directly impacts me. Your belief in your uninterrogated belief in a system of bodily hierarchy impacts my life. Right? Our uninterrogated beliefs that thin bodies are better than fat bodies ensures that the medical care that I get will always be deficient. Right? Our uninterrogated belief that white bodies are better than black bodies and better than other bodies of color ensures that the health outcomes and economic outcomes of my life will always look different than white people's. Right? That your belief that heterosexuality is the default identity means that the way that I love will always be marginalized. So the idea that somehow our biases and beliefs and prejudices live in some little container that we get to hold away from the rest of the world is a fiction. And it's a fiction that plays out on the bodies of the most marginalized people. Right? And so consequently, I get on a plane from New Zealand and fly around the world to teach people about radical self-love because I need them to get out of my radical self-love road. I describe humans as, lumbering bovines sitting in the middle of someone else's radical self-love road, grazing in the field, completely oblivious to the way in which your beliefs, ideas, and thoughts are obstructing someone else's journey. Because our journeys are interdependent. The biggest lie you've ever been told is the lie of individualism. The lie that somehow what happens to you is only about you. It's not. Right? And so that's why it's related. And then the last 2, forming a basis or foundation. We have tried to build this world on lots of different things, and none of them have worked. And that needed to be a song. We have tried to build it on capitalism. Look where we are. Just look around, right? We have tried to build the world on lots of different things. I'm offering that we cannot build a just, equitable, and compassionate world, which is the mission of the body is not an apology. That we cannot build that on any foundation other than love. It's not possible. Because when we don't build it on love, then all the things that were in the old iteration get baked into the new iteration. Right? It's the reason why the prison industrial complex looks so much like chattel slavery. Because we were like, oh, let's change that. But we didn't change any of our beliefs about black bodies. Right. We didn't change any of our beliefs about punishment and violence. We didn't change any of those things, right? And all of those things existed in chattel slavery. So when we were like, well, that's not right anymore, well, except it's right under these conditions. That's what happens when we do not change the foundation of our beliefs when we're trying to create a new world, right? So I would offer that we can't build anything externally that we have not built internally. Right? And I'm not the only person offering that. Grace Lee Boggs offers that. Audre Lorde offers that. James Baldwin offers that. I'm just saying some shit some other people said, right? And then lastly, existing inherently in a thing or a person. You came here that way. It is already who you are. And for me, that's such a relief. The idea that I don't have to figure out radical self-love. Oh, I don't know how I love myself. The way to loving ourselves is to figure out all the things in between, right? All the stuff. The path back to radical self-love is the path of looking fear-facingly. I use that word, and I don't believe in fearlessness. Fear-facingly at the things that we hate. Being honest with ourselves about where our self-loathing and our hatred lies, and how that is reflected not only in our relationships with ourselves, but in relationships with other bodies. Word? Thank you for that. All right, what else? Other thoughts, questions? There's one over here.
I know for a lot of us, the concept of self-love gets really muddied when there's a presence of trauma and a presence of grief. Yes. And I think it'd be helpful just to see how have you seen that or grappled with that in your work, given that you know one thing conceptually, and then that trauma is reminding you at 2 a.m. that you ain't shit.
Yes.
And how do you reconcile these pieces when you know and you want to, but you still feel held back by some of those really heavy emotions?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So the first thing that I say all the time, right, is that none of this I'm proposing is easy. You know, sometimes people are like, "Oh, you just love yourself," all right? And no, lies, right? And the reality is that we are trying to get back to who we inherently are through a road that is constantly putting down new pavement, right? We're constantly the self-hatred road is constantly repaving all day long. Through every single thing you engage with, through your own history of trauma and pain, constantly trying to repave the road, right? And so for me, one of the ways that I navigate that, and I talk about this very specifically through my own experience with major depressive disorder and mental health and neurodivergence, is there's the conceptual knowledge, right? There's this thing I know, right? And then there's this thing which I call the outside voice inside of us, inside the book, right? It is the externalized voice of shame, pain, trauma, and fear that is so loud that it sounds like it's ours, right? And I believe that one of the key ways that we begin to challenge that voice is to first discern it as not ours. So that when we hear it, we actually have the capacity to challenge it, right? It's hard to challenge a thing you believe is actually yours, right? When I ain't shit shows up, if you're like, oh no, I really ain't shit, that's different than, oh, I ain't shit showed up, but I'm really clear I didn't give I ain't shit to me. That's not actually mine, right? And so what it does is it puts a little distance between you and the thing, right? You and the voice. And once there's some space between you and the voice, you can actually begin to challenge it, right? I grew up as a kid talking to myself. I always talk to myself. I like talking, and so I made the washcloths talk to the soap and the toothpaste talk to the toothbrush, and everything was personified in my world. And maybe that's why this model works for me so well. And people would be like, don't talk to yourself. And so in some ways, I think I created all these external things to talk so that I wasn't talking to myself because that was like a bad thing, right? Or then somebody was like, as long as you don't answer. Well, now I talk to myself and I answer, and we have great fucking conversations. It's awesome. But when there is something to talk to, then there's a dialogue that can happen, right? And so when that voice of trauma shows up and it's outside, I recognize it, at least, even if it's only intellectually, as outside of me, I now can debate that voice. Me and that voice we don't have to be on the same page. I can disagree with you, And even if I don't disagree with you, I can pretend to disagree with you until I really disagree with you. Right? So much of this practice is absolutely, people are like, I don't know. You all have heard fake it till you make it, right? And I deeply 1,000,000,000% believe that. Why? Because action actually transforms things neurologically. Neurologically, your brain begins to shift if you repeat a thing long enough, right? So if you repeat the opposite of you ain't shit long enough, you ain't shit starts to be shaky. It actually starts not to have the same kind of foundational possibility that it had before you started interrogating it, right? So that to me feels like one of the key pieces of it. And for me, it's also I call it kind of my own teaspoon theory. There is a tiny part of me, particularly in the times when I was really struggling with suicidal ideation. There was a tiny part of me that was like, you don't really want to go. And even if 98% of me was like, get out of here, I would tell myself before I ended up in the ideation space, when you're in that space, listen to the 2%. The 98% will be loud, but your job right now is to only obey the 2%. Right? And when I chose to obey the 2% long enough to ride it out, till the 2% became 5%, till the 5% became 10%, till I moved back up to more of me wanting to be here than not. Right? And so those are that's one of the tools that I think can be really, really helpful. I'm a huge proponent of therapy. It has changed my life, and very specifically, trauma-informed therapy and modalities that are designed to deal with trauma. For me, EMDR has been transformative in terms of beginning to interrupt that neurological pathway that returns me to that trauma place. Right? So there are things that exist. I'm a believer that you should put as many tools in your tool belt as you can, because if the wrench don't work, pull out the saw. If the saw don't work, pull out the axe. If the axe ain't working, get you a teaspoon, whatever it is. Sometimes you do. You got to dig the ditch with a teaspoon, right? But pull out, if you have a multitude of tools, when that time comes up, you just try things until something works. Yeah, thank you for that. Other thoughts? There's a hand back here in the corner.
I think it's definitely very hard, like especially for me, 10 plus years of just reading and just like seeing around in my surroundings, just that white is beautiful and everything that's against me is beautiful. Like reading books in which my role models are white is very difficult. And right now, when I'm starting college and reading stories in which, right now I was reading White Sargasso Sea, and it was Rochester, which is a white European man, making love to a black woman and him finding it disgusting. And it's just very difficult to kind of deconstruct and destruct that that numbing to me how white is beautiful and everything. It's just really difficult.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like it's not going to change overnight. And it's kind of like finding value in yourself and your community. And it's just very difficult, I believe, especially in this environment.
Yeah, definitely. And so one of the things, thank you for that. It's so very true, right? And that's true for any way. So in the book, I talk about this idea of the bodily hierarchy, right? And that is, what are the bodies that the world says are valuable, are the most valuable? And that we exist on a human scale, under these social systems of bodies that are the most valuable and bodies that are not, right? And be clear that even if you live at the top of the scale, and under this construct, in this particular social dynamic, the top of the scale is a cis, heterosexual, able-bodied, young male. Cis male, right? That's the top of the scale. That's what the world says is the most important and valuable body. However, even that body doesn't win under the system of bodily hierarchy. And that's the thing I think is important to remember, is that nobody actually wins under this system, right? You might get more things under the social construct. But first of all, oppression will never, ever, ever give you privilege without asking you to exchange your humanity. Never. You will never be given a privilege that doesn't cost you something as a human being. in connection and relationship to other human beings. And, one of the things that I talk about in the book is, and often in my workshops is, right, like the suicide rate for white men over 50 jumps by 50% once they hit over 50. And I'm always asking people, why do white men over 50 just start really killing themselves? What's that about? So I'm asking y'all, what's that about? What do you think that's about?
I think maybe a part of it could be toxic masculinity and the need for and the pressure for men to suppress their emotions and not deal with their emotions in an effective way.
Yeah, okay, definitely. There's another hand beside you.
I think it's a very drastic change. Like you go from being seemingly at the very top of this hierarchy to all of a sudden not. And how do you cope with that change? How do you cope with not being this alpha or on top being? So I think that's why like one is not able to reconcile that, therefore they turn to suicide.
Absolutely. Okay. There's a hand over here.
I think maybe it comes from sort of the realization that like the system that they've been benefiting from for a really long time has also been slowly killing them. For a lot of people, it's a lot more salient that like systems of supremacy are actively hurting you, but like they're hurting everyone, just like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So that moment when you realize that, holy shit, this thing that I've been benefiting from for so long has slowly been breaking me down.
Absolutely.
It's tough.
Yeah, totally. These are all brilliant answers. Here's my conjecture, and it lives in the space of all of these, right? Is particularly under a westernized ideal of masculinity. Masculinity is defined by all things external, right? It's all things amassed wealth, sexual virility, able-bodiedness and strength, right? Yeah, so money, women, strength, right? That's it. That's what we tell men makes you a man, right? And at 50, all of those sorts of things become very trepidatious, right? As you age, right? As you age, sexual virility changes, our bodies change, desirability in the current landscape changes, right? Tech bros are not 55, right? The technological world we are living in doesn't premium age in the same way that it used to, right? And so if everything it is that you have created your identity on lives outside of you, and then you watch those things slowly begin to be discarded, what is left? What is left for you to buoy your own sense of self on? Right? If everything that made you important is gone, then how do you feel important enough to stay? Right? And so, again, this idea, radical self-love shifts the value of our humanity from some externalized system to an inherently internalized system, which allows the material circumstances of the external world to change and for you to still feel valuable enough to be here. Right? And so oppression and the ideas of whose bodies are valuable, as long as there is some externalized system of value, we all are in detriment to actually being able to feel valuable enough, worthy enough, important enough to survive the circumstances of our world. Right? And so one of the things that I wanted to say in terms of this struggle that you shared, around sort of what does it do with like when the entire world is telling you that this is the right body, right? In the book, at the very end of the book, I have 10 tools to radical self-love. They're really practical, easy, simple things that I believe we can do to start transforming our relationship with our own bodies. And one of them is, number one, is dump the junk. And dump the junk really just talks about what is the information that you are intaking that is counter to your own radical self-love journey. What things are you choosing to read, to watch, to listen to that reinforce the notion that you're deficient? And so if reading novels that only have, thin white women as protagonists is detrimental to you, stop reading those. Or at least be an inquiry about why do I keep choosing to engage in a message that I know is harming me. Right? And some of those things are because you're in school and a place that values Eurocentric knowledge, and so consequently they give you those books that reinforce that, right? Hot take. But here's a radical self-love action you can take in service to yourself and in service towards others for people who are like, how does this radical self-love work outside of me in relationship to other bodies? Is you start challenging the spaces where that's the only thing you see. So the next time your professor hands you for the 5th time a book with all white characters and white protagonists, you ask them, excuse me, I would love to read something that reflects me and other people in the world. Can I share a book with you that I think the class might enjoy? Or can you please provide some other, and if that doesn't work, then you begin. That's how, and this is the key, this is the piece about how radical self-love becomes activism in the world. It's because you get tired of being reflected in ways that do not value and honor your own radical self-love, and then you get engaged towards changing that, and that is how systems change. We often talk about this idea that the system and structures and system and the structures. The systems and the structures are y'all. They're us. They are not amorphous, like blobs of ideas that just float in the world. Those ideas live in heads, they live in bodies. They go to work every day and uphold them or disrupt them. Right? One of my favorite memes in the world says, guy, my uncle's a racist, but he's really harmless. Me, what does he do? Oh, he's a mortgage broker. Right? It's like, wait a minute. So your uncle determines who and who can't own a home, but his racism is harmless, right? But that's how we think, because we think that's a system, not an individual. Except that that's an individual making a decision that impacts a system. And every single day, we participate in the upholding of systems or in the dismantling of them. Right? And that's choice. We're at choice around that, right? And so again, if you find yourself engaged in content that doesn't reflect you, that reinforces that you are not valuable as who you are, challenge that content. Challenge first yourself and why you are choosing to continue to engage it. If it's outside of a function of choice, then begin being like, all right, well, what would it look like if I challenged this? What would it look like if I didn't accept, right, this particular representation as the only representation of value? Right? So again, in these ideas of being fear-facing, and I want to read this section on fear-facing, because again, I am never, ever, 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 ever proposing that this is easy or simple or not a big deal. It's scary, hard work, right? But it is, the alternative. What's the alternative? An endless reign of oppression and self-loathing? Right? So, I'm a firm believer that nothing grows without discomfort. Nothing grows without discomfort. Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without demand. Right? That there is nothing that you want changed in the world that's going to be easy. Right? Never. So that part, comfort is a great way to just be hanging out in a space of body terrorism. And body terrorism is the way that I talk about the systems and structures that we live under in a world organized by body hierarchy. Because all of those things that I described are terroristic acts, right? And we often describe terrorism as, extreme violence, often fueled for political motive, right? Usually political motive. And I would offer that there is a political motive to having you hate yourself. There's a political motive to having you deeply immersed, embedded, and indoctrinated into a system that undervalues you and then tells you that there are other bodies you should undervalue. And that political system is extreme and will go as far as to kill people to maintain it, right? That's not me. That's not hyperbolic, Like we put people in internment camps. We literally murder people. We threw millions of people over ships, Like, these are not hyperbolic, right? Like, we sterilize bodies under the process of eugenics. You know? So this isn't like, oh my gosh, I'm so extreme. No, that's actually what we do. So if what we're so the option is to kick it with that or to change it, right? Those are the choices. And I would offer that throughout history, the people who have been the most willing to get uncomfortable have always been the people who are already uncomfortable, right? The people who were already like, it wasn't nice for me no how, right? And so I would offer that if ever there were a time for the comfortable people to get uncomfortable, it's now, right? To join the efforts of people who have been historically uncomfortable. And that requires a level of fear facingness. And I can never find this page, but I'm going to find it. It is. Is this a look at you? You better have it. Somebody got the good book. Thank you. 60. Yes. All right. Okay. Living a radical self-love life is a process of de-indoctrination. It demands that we look unflinchingly at our current set of beliefs about ourselves and the world and get willing to explore them. I call this the act of being fear-facing. Fear-facingness is not the absence of fear, but the interrogation of it. While agonizing over the completion of this book, I spent some time emptying my brain at a friend's home on a private beach in Long Island, Bahamas. The island was slow and kind, like a good grandfather. During one of our excursions, we drove westward down miles of crumbled, unforgiving asphalt until we arrived at a small beach. The sign at the edge of the road read, "Warning, Dean's Hole is the deepest in the world. Swim at your own risk." 2 feet from the beach shore, the cerulean water stops being waist high, and within a few steps, the ocean floor drops into a cavernous 663 feet deep hole. Despite my being a competent swimmer, fear consumed me. I was certain that the mouth of the deep blue hole would suck me down to its watery floor. In my research, I would later discover that my fear mirrored the exact superstitions that kept the native islanders away from the hole. Needless to say, I kept my distance. It was at Dean's Hole where I met David Carrera, a freediving champion from Italy. Freediving entails using a cable to descend into extreme ocean depths without the use of breathing equipment. David holds his country's record with a 111-meter dive. That is the equivalent of diving off a 35-story building. He was taking a break from competition and enjoying the beach with his fellow divers when we struck up a conversation. And it is in these chance encounters that I'm reminded that if we're open to it, we will find confirmation of our divine pathway all around us. The dive is a spiritual thing, David said. I learned how to listen to my body. I must listen or I will die. In the water, I learned the difference between fear and danger. He did not know it, but David was describing the journey of radical self-love. It is damn scary to probe the depths of the thoughts, ideas, and subconscious principles that govern our daily lives. To be fear-facing is to learn the distinction between fear and danger. It is to look directly at the source of the fear and assess if we are truly in peril or if we are simply afraid of the unknown. The unknown is like a fog, and of course, fog is frightening. Who knows what obstructions could be lurking about? What if there's a deer soon to be splayed on my windshield? What if I careen off a cliff while driving in the thick soup of a fog? Living with body shame and body terrorism is to be stuck in an endless what-if fog, a place of inertia. The only way out of the fog is through it. We must dive into the unknown, trusting that our bodies will help us discern fear from danger. There is always a clearing on the other side of fog. To be fear-facing is to navigate cautiously and with alertness, but to continue our journey. Before we parted, I asked David what continues to call him to the sport of freediving. He beamed at me, the Bohemian sun lucid behind him, and said, "Every meter is a tiny freedom." Yes, it is. So, here's the deal, right? Is that one, the journey back to ourselves, the stuff that we're wrestling with us, is fear. And it's usually not danger. Not always, but usually not danger, right? It's particularly, I think about this when I think about when I was doing my own EMDR work in therapy. And it was terrifying to revisit these traumas that happened to me. Like it felt horrifying. It felt like I was gonna die. But I wasn't gonna die. Because the truth is, I already lived through them. I already survived them. You already survived it. That's how you're here to even look back at it. It's because you already made it through, right? And so what feels like fear is not danger. It is not, I will go back there and it will happen again, because it won't, because it's done, right? And so fear facing this is to be willing to look through that terrifying fog, right, and trust that there's clearing on the other side, right? The journey of radical self-love, like I said, with us and us, is usually a fog-based fear, right? The journey of radical self-love with us and systems is not always a fog-based fear. Sometimes it is actual danger, right? And Black trans women have a life expectancy of 32 because it's actual danger, right? And it's danger whether you love yourself or it's danger whether you don't. So why not love yourself? Right? If I'm gonna die anyway, if my mortal existence is on the line anyway, right? Then why choose to forego all of the things that could give me access to power, that could give me access to my own sense of dignity and enoughness in the world. And so that is why I propose that we should do this work. Not because it's easy, not because it's not scary, not because there aren't real material risks involved with it, but because how we are already living is already destroying us, right? It's already destroying us. And so why stay in a destruction? I am really motivated by self-righteousness. I don't know about you, but I'm a Scorpio. That's how we work. Okay. And so consequently, as soon as I feel like I'm being worked, when I feel like I'm being taken advantage, oh, you think you're going to play me? Right? That's the thing that gets me riled up. And so I invite you to take a little bit of that for your own journey, right? If the system is trying to work you, fuck the system, right? That's how I feel about that. If the system is trying to take advantage of me, if the system is totally benefiting from my self-loathing, then I'm about to give it something else. Because if it's gonna dig my grave, I'm certainly not about to handle the shovel. Y'all can take that one for the ride. All right, I think we'll do a final question, sort of final. Anybody burning things left in you?
Deep in your heart.
Deep in your heart. Or the bravest question of the day. Ooh, I like that. There's a hand. Oh, there's two. Okay, we're going to take both of those. Okay. So we're going to take that one and that one over there. Hi.
My name is Janitha. I'm a sophomore.
Hi, Janitha.
How would you suggest that I begin on my journey towards being an advocate for self-love and changing the perception of how we view Black bodies and POC bodies in general?
Yeah. Get the book. That's always my first suggestion is get the book. So I say that radical self-love work is a thinking, doing, being process. That's the way I talk about it in the book. Thinking. First, that we have to become intimately related with our own beliefs and ideas. Right? We actually have to start to be an inquiry about what is it that I already believe about this Black body. Right? The good, the bad, the ugly, the things I don't even want to tell myself. Right? I have to get honest with myself about that. Because again, much like I said earlier, once I can be in dialogue with the thing, then I'm at choice. There's efficacy. When it is default, we just operate as we've always operated. It's not even conscious, like breathing or blinking or the other things that we do involuntarily in our bodies. Without bringing those thoughts to our conscious awareness, they operate in the same way. But once they are in our conscious awareness, then I actually have some efficacy and choice about how I want to engage with that, right? And then choosing a new action, action that is different than what it is I've historically done, gives me access over time to a different way of being in the world. Right? The repetition of thinking and doing gives me a new kind of being. So begin to be looking at in your own journey, how am I already doing that, and what are the things that are key? Where are my boundaries? What's the outer wall and the ceiling on how it is that I'm unapologetically loving Black folks and people of color in my world? What do I bump up against? What do I bump up against? How does in our intersections, right? Do I love Black folks as long as they're not over this weight? Do I love Black folks as long as they're not doing this? Do I love Black folks as long as they look like this? Right? What are those? Start feeling for what those are, and then start pushing those walls. All right? And then start asking other people. When you see other people's boundaries of loving Blackness show up, start asking them to inquire about their own walls. Why is it exceptional? Or, why does this death matter of this kid who was going to college than the kid who was killed in a drug deal? Right? And then once we begin to start engaging with that space, that's how we begin to open that up, right? Until eventually we have a collective transformation of those boundaries, right? And hopefully eventually that they collapse, right? That we make the wall so thin it can't stand no more. So yeah, that's why I would say, so get the book and then just start feeling for your own walls. Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And then there was one more.
Yeah, it was essentially the same question.
Great.
Thank you for answering.
Absolutely. And that's the answer for everybody. Where are your walls on your radical self-love for yourself? I love myself as long as, if I, just so much as, what are those? And start pressing on those walls. Right? And then exploring where those walls exist in relationship to other bodies as well. Right? Get the book, Follow the Body's Not An Apology. We have up here. You can get on my mailing list. I tell you the nice things from New Zealand. We're launching Body's Not An Apology Radical Healing Retreats in New Zealand. I know, it's dope. It's dope. You can come to Blackwood Manor. That's my house I'm moving into when I get back, and it has a little plaque on it that says Blackwood Manor, and it's beautiful, and it has a swimming pool and beautiful accommodations, and we'll take good care of you, and we'll do this work together. So that's one of the things that you'll find out about if you sign up for here. And you also find about we're getting ready to launch a podcast in January that will detail all the content that the Body Is Not An Apology has created over the last 5 years. We will turn those into conversations. So all of those articles that we've been writing about will become dialogue in real life. With folks like Caleb Luna, who used to be Body's Not Apology writer. We're just dope people. I'm so happy for my team. It's been beautiful. So yeah, do all of those things. You can follow me on my website, SoniaReneeTaylor.com. You should holler at me on Instagram lately. I've been doing a new series called What's Up, Y'all, where I just get on Instagram and just talk about the intersections of all these ideas and the way that they live in my life. So I had a fascinating encounter at a post office the other day. It was fascinating. I got to press my own boundaries and inquire about my own stuff. So follow me on Instagram. That's a fun place. And if, I know y'all, at least when I was in college, everybody was a broke college student. I don't know if that's the reality today because I'm many moons away from college. But if you want to join my Patreon, feel free. If you got extra $5 to sprinkle in the world once a month to, help support the labor of this fair Black woman in New Zealand trying to do this radical self-love work, holler at my Patreon account. You all have been divine. Thank you so much for being in conversation with me. It was good for me. I hope it was good for you.
Thank you. Another round of applause, please. Thank you all again for coming, for engaging, for kind of, and for those of you that were brave in this moment. Thank you. Thank you for coming. If you can help stack chairs, that would be really great. And clean up after yourselves. Thursday, 7 p.m., Lessons in Drag with Lahore, Rajasthan. Will be beautiful. Don't miss it.
You're able to get parking anywhere? You're able to get parking? I got the last spot in that line. Okay. Cool. Okay. I don't know your first name. I just put your Instagram. Joke. Yeah. Hi. I know. And that. I would have been on I saw you. I was so jealous of your fan. I was like, ah, sweet honey here. Thank you. I appreciate it. My Much time. Right. Yes, I had the legacy. Are you starting Oh yeah.
Are you gonna go? So, I'm sorry.
Yes, I
Flying from London to JFK on the 31st. I don't know how we're going to get around the line on the 31st. If shit goes down like this.